Audience, welcome to Viewpoint from Overseas. I have with me my friends Mr. Riaz Haq and Mr. Sabahat Ashraf. Kashmir, ladies and gentlemen, the K word between India and Pakistan. Where we are heading at? Are India and Pakistan capable to ever resolve this problem? Is Kashmir the only issue between India and Pakistan? Are they going to fight more wars on that? Are we capable militarily to take over this, to resolve this problem? Yes or no? India and Pakistan fought 3 wars on this issue. 1948, 1965, 1971 war was, although not on Kashmir, but the Kargil conflict is almost a war which was fought on Kashmir. So 3 wars, ladies and gentlemen. Little bit incident happened. We go back to the square one. And we all start all over. So let us talk about what are the capabilities of India and Pakistan to resolve as per diplomacy is concerned, as per military power is concerned, and so on. Our friend Mr. Riaz Haq, he had a very good blog published this last week. Some of you may have read it. You can go to riazhaq.com and read this article and give us your views. So Riaz Haq, you raised some interesting points in your recent blog. Just explain us how you see the whole scenario and how you see this Pulwama incident, and are we going to have these type of things always? We will be fighting, killing each other always? This is the way we are all for one day we will nuke each other?
I think there's been a fundamental change in the way the relationship has been, particularly since Mr. Modi became Prime Minister of India. It's the Hindu Nationalist Party. Their politics is essentially around hatred of Muslims and going after Pakistan to win votes, and these things tend to come up particularly around election time. They use it as a way to win votes. Now, the other thing that has happened in this period is that a lot of the Western media in particular and Western analysts have been boosting India as a rising great power in Pakistan as a nation that is collapsing. And part of the motivation for the West to boost India has been to essentially position it as a counterweight against rising China. So the expectation of the world was, and a lot of people wrote about it, is that hey, if India decided to go after Pakistan, decided to punish it, Pakistan can't do anything. They'll just have to.
That came after this quote-unquote surgical strike.
Yeah, so this was a common perception.
That's true.
But the reality has turned out to be very different in this encounter. First they went to Balakot. They claimed that they had bombed Balakot and killed upwards of 300 militants there, supposedly. And then that turned out to be false. In fact, there's absolutely no evidence of that. Then the Pakistanis decided to counterattack, and then they went into the Indian airspace across the LOC, not the Indian airspace, but in the disputed area of Kashmir. And there was a dogfight, and then Pakistan claims that they shot down 2 Indian aircraft. And at least one of them, the wreckage, fell on the Pakistani side, and the pilot was captured by Pakistan. So the encounter that occurred basically negated all of the expectations that the West had of any conflict between India and Pakistan. So they were forced to write articles like New York Times wrote, that this has been an awakening, of the West. They have been shocked by what they saw, they were expecting India to perform better, but India has performed very poorly. And then there was another article in the Economist magazine that basically called India a paper elephant. And it said that, India spends a lot of money. In fact, they have a graph in that article that shows that India's defense budget has been rising very rapidly. It was almost, like this, where Pakistan has been increasing, but at a much lower pace.
Yeah, but that is until 2017, because after that, Pakistan last...
Even then, even after you include that, there's no comparison.
Of course.
So there's about, India spending about 6 times more.
That's correct.
So the article says that they, essentially that India is really not getting their money's worth for what they spend on it. And we saw the result of it.
Yeah. So, Sabahat, is India really a paper elephant, as economists say that?
I want to start out with a phrase that Riyaz Saab just used about India performing poorly. Now, if you want to break that down from the economic side, India, for my money, is actually now coming out of that Cold War deep freeze that its economy had been put in. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about, which is the conversation in the US now, how much of that was socialism or Nehruvian socialism that had held them down. But in terms of how much, see, what happens with a society coming up is that their economy has made strides. The economy, their society has made some strides over the last few decades. However, on the military side, on being a power, the way I see it, there are a couple or three things to look at. First of all is the one I have often said, even on this show, that for a rising power, the Indian establishment and India as a nation have acted very immaturely. They don't seem to have the gravitas or the sobriety, the maturity that a power of their size should have, right? They've acted, and this, I know the layer of having Hindu nationalist governments between Vajpayee and Modi adds a new layer to it, but India and their national myth, even under the Congress, was still pretty jingoistic. It was still pretty immature, if I may say so, and inconsistent. I mean, their national myth, for all the things we hear about Pakistan being, having propaganda and this and that, the Indian national myth is internally much less consistent, and I've said this before, than even the Pakistani one. So they've always acted a little oddly. Mm-hmm. And as Riyasa pointed out, and his article points out, there's actually a couple of things that Riyasa pointed out in his article and had come up with discussions with Indian friends before that really need to be pointed out. First of all, the fact of their military not performing as well. Now, Pakistan, for all the criticism that we have of the armed forces, especially Pakistan's Air Force, is stellar, right? Given how they operate and all of that, and they have always performed amazingly. And what India was trying to do, I think, in this case, was to do a reset. You use the phrase square one. I don't think this is square one. This is at least...
Reset, how do you describe reset?
What they were trying to do and what they had tried, now that they are coming up power, they have wanted, especially under the Hindu nationalist governments, they have tried to change India's position on the global stage and in the equation with Pakistan. Raising India to the level of a nuclear power was the first step, right? They actually carried out a nuclear test which raised India to that echelon. And in that case, you will actually note that it was a given from day one that if India did it, Pakistan would do it. So they were actually inadvertently also raising Pakistan's stature. But that play, I think, and as my Indian friend was saying, was not a play in the equation between India and Pakistan. It was a play to raise India to that level. It was an answer to the West that you're going to have to take us more seriously, stop treating us as if we're sitting at the little boy's table, right? That is one thing they did. Now, with the surgical strike, let me finish the thread.
Yeah.
With the surgical strike and what they tried to pull at Balakot this time was them trying to act, as my Indian friend, I might as well name him, Mr. Avnish Madan was saying, what they were trying to do was actually trying to act the way the US does in its sphere of influence. That we can go in and do X or Y in Venezuela or El Salvador or whatever. They wanted the surgical strike, that also the hype around the surgical strike was an attempt to do that. The previous one, that we went in, we did a surgical strike, we got out, Pakistan couldn't do anything. So they were trying to do that. This strike, one way to look at this strike, the Balakot one, was that they would get in. They had a very well-planned, well-coordinated airstrike, which they did, and then they would get out. Pakistan would not be able to do anything, and then they could go and say, hey, we are a regional power, we do what we want. The little detail of one of their planes actually getting shot down in Pakistani territory kind of, pissed in their soup, so to speak. It spoiled that whole arc. And then Pakistan was able to very deftly, either on its own or the military or with Western backing, was able to leverage that, take advantage of that by acting like the more mature government and nation, where they released the pilot, they were able to say, we followed the Geneva Convention, we are so good, the whole thing. So that is one whole thing. The last footnote I would like to add and put on the table, because it is time to have that discussion, is something else Riaz Saab mentioned in his post, which is that India has very self-consciously kept its army on leash. Like Riaz Saab pointed out, up to the 62 war with China, they had actually kept their military weak, which, by the way, is a sore spot for a lot of Indians, patriotic Indians, and we feel for them that they're like, we're such a big power, why can't we have an army that can at least stand up for ourselves? But there is a reason for that. See, if you look at major former British colonies, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, and other smaller ones like Fiji, they all had a problem with the army they inherited from the Raj, the British Indian Army. Burma, right? Where the army in Pakistan, in Pakistan, in Nigeria, in Burma, in Fiji, has interfered with politics. India has very self-consciously kept its army down to size. And that has led to, problems, or at least a problem in their national self-confidence at one level. And that has to be factored in with this layer of Hindu nationalist governments coming in and saying, no, now we need to stand on our own feet. So that is one of the dynamics playing itself within that reset, where the Hindu nationalist governments are raising India's stature both within and without. Stature, or you would say posture. They're changing the posture of India. The rest is details, and as Riaz Saab pointed out, and we are seeing, they're having trouble with that. And I put at least some of that down, as I said, to the lack of maturity or sobriety or basically depth of thinking, which is actually surprising, because we all think of India or ancient India as this place where great philosophy, even Chanakya and the other philosopher that Riaz Saab mentioned the other day. Well, all of that should go into their thinking. This acting of in such an immature way is a problem.
Yeah, so Riaz, I have a couple of things here. First of all, let's talk about surgical strike. So I will tell you and you just go back to that. Dr. Happy Moon, he's a scholar in Lucknow University.
Jacob.
He's a recent, Jacob, Dr. Happy Moon Jacob, thank you. So he just had a book and he mentioned almost 34 incidents where India and Pakistan did these quote-unquote surgical strikes. So he does not put any weight on that, but he put a lot of weight on Balakot strike, that this is something different, that they crossed the limits where they were. Second thing, as you wrote and our friend Sabahat talked about it, that Indian army was kind of organized by the civilian authority in a way that they do not get too powerful to go take over the country. You'll remember during the time of Indira Gandhi, like some of the generals thought about it. Of course, it's a news which was denied later on, so I don't want to quote over and over. However, Now you see that the new Chief of Army Staff talks to the nation on the Republic Day. Do you really think that one of my Indian friends just yesterday was telling me the reason of trouble, one reason of trouble, of course he say a lot of things about Pakistani militants and this and that, but besides that he say if you look at India, that Mr. Modi just gave the Indian military go do whatever you want, and he says that war is too dangerous thing to be dealt by the generals only, you know. So how you see this overall scenario? Are you seeing India and other threatening power to the world like in during the, I don't want to go that far actually giving this example which I'm about to say, but you know, kind of that during the time of World War II, Hitler, West has some sort of obsession with Hitler that they will make him, let him stay there, and they will be he will be standing next to the communists. So are you seeing something like that? India is turning to, West is ready to that, and later on they will regret on that? Your point.
Yeah, I think there is a phrase that was invented by Sashi Tharoor. He's an Indian diplomat, politician, is a writer. He's very well known.
Yeah, of course.
And what he said was, and this was a few years ago, that India suffers from Israel envy.
From Israel's envy.
Israel envy. They want to be like Israel.
Like Israel.
And he pointed out a lot of the talk in India about let's do to Pakistan what Israel does to its neighbors.
Yeah, but it's different.
Yeah, that's what he says. That hey, you know, Palestinians cannot, don't even have a regular army.
Of course, yeah.
You know, in Gaza you can do that, yeah. Or you can do it in Lebanon.
Yeah.
But Pakistan is a nuclear armed country.
Yeah.
So don't talk like that.
Yeah.
So he advised them that. Then at another point he said that you know, Indians want to be superpower. You know, when in fact India is super poor.
Well, they are poor, of course.
They're very poor,
very
actually.
poor country. That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
They're regular.
So, I mean, there's a huge gap between their ambition and the reality of where they are. And part of it is this Hindu nationalism is actually promoting this idea that we're so big, so smart, so capable. And just listen to their rhetoric about Pakistan, how they talk about Pakistan. Look at their media. The media has been completely co-opted.
That's true. This is all propaganda.
It's become somebody's written about it, that is, you know, in the Washington Post, that the Indian media has basically become a propaganda machine.
Yes.
For the Modi government.
That's true.
So I think that is a phenomenon that is dangerous, because Hitler and Modi, people are making those comparisons. You know, and
that was my question.
Yeah, and there's, in fact, I read an article in Haaretz which talks about how the Hindu nationalists are so similar to the Nazis. It's a supremacist ideology that Hindu supremacist essentially, and in fact, the guy who was their founder of the Hindu nationalism, the guy who started this whole movement, RSS. His name was Golwalkar. And Golwalkar has written in his book, that we basically should do to Muslims in India what Hitler did to Jews in Europe. So this is where these guys are coming from. Unfortunately, though, they don't have that kind of strength. Now, I do worry that with that kind of thinking, they can precipitate a very dangerous war. Because assuming, you know, the kind of assumptions they have about themselves, that they can just nuke Pakistan and get away with it, is a very dangerous kind of a thinking. Because they're not going to be able to get away with it. In fact, Pakistanis know that Indians have this kind of thinking. In fact, the fact that the Pakistani airspace was closed, and still closed actually, parts of it are still closed.
Part of it, yeah.
Is because there was a real threat. The Pakistani intelligence detected movement in India.
Amir Khwari's story in the news, I read that.
That indicated that they were planning to actually launch a missile attack on Pakistan. And that's when the Pakistanis went to the Americans and the British and told them that if there is a missile attack on Pakistan, there will be a massive retaliation from us.
More we will do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's a real danger of that happening. And I think this is a time for the world to wake up to the reality of what Hindu nationalism is, what a dangerous philosophy it is, and how it can bring the world to the brink of disaster.
Sabahat, let me go to the other side of this whole scenario. The Pakistan's military's support to the militant organizations inside the country. Okay, now it's very difficult here to talk about it. United Nations, and I'm really confused. Please try to explain. I'll ask Riaz also same question. That at one hand, these militant organizations, you and I talk about it, that we should be containing them and all those kind of things. They should not be trained by Pakistanis and all that. Fine. I mean, I fully agree with it. Pakistan should not do that, and they should crack down on that. And they are not an asset. They are actually the one who destroyed the Kashmir cause, basically, Kashmir movement. I'm telling you the way I see it, and you can disagree with me on that. However, if any organization inside Kashmir, inside the Indian side or Indian occupied Kashmir, has this type of organization working inside without the help of Pakistan's help, and they do some kind of attacking on the hard target. This is that question I asked also Dr. Mueed Yusuf last week. Attacking the hard targets when I say I mean military targets, then according to the UN, they are allowed to do it. So where we should draw the line, because Prime Minister Imran Khan called it, and a lot of people say that Imran Khan should start reading the article instead of talking extempore. He keeps calling it terrorist attack in his extempore speech. More than once he said that, which a lot of media pointed out. So how I can call them if somebody is inside Kashmir attacking them as a terrorism? How you see that? And answer also my first part of the question about Pakistan controlling these things. Do you think it's really the case?
You've raised 2 or 3 very, very deep and complicated issues here, right? From the definition of terrorism, on which there is a definition of terrorism in the dictionary, there is a definition of terrorism in political science. And then there is a definition of terrorism that a lot of governments raise for their own interests, right? Personally, I subscribe to the definition in the political science textbooks because that is the real relevant one. However, and that's one layer, and I'm actually going to avoid jumping into the middle of that whole thing because that's a nest of wasps. Secondly, when you say Imran Khan spoke without thinking, that is also not new. He's been doing that for about 60, 70 years now.
No, but he is not Prime Minister of the country. Anything he says, it's...
I know, I'm not denying that. No, I'm sorry. In fact, I go for the
country's policy.
But here's my point. He should have been changing how he talks, not now, not when he's Prime Minister, but 23, 24 years ago, when he wanted or chose to become a politician, a major politician in a major country. I mean, that is relevant. For him to say terrorist is a big problem here, because when, like you are saying, a government statement has importance, it has significance, it has legal and political and military implications, right? So he should really think about that, which actually makes me think for him to say that and no one to correct him, there might be more afoot here than we know. Which brings me to my next point, which I've been wanting to say from the beginning, that in South Asia particularly, third world generally, but in these equations, India, Pakistan, nobody is telling you the whole truth or taking a principled stand. Nobody. Not even us. Not even the people. Because if any of us, if Pakistan, for example, if you notice, on this Balakot attack, Pakistan is not calling it officially what it is. It was an invasion of Pakistani space. It was a violation of the line of control. It was, because the moment they say that, they have to admit that there has been an act of war committed against Pakistan. And the moment you admit that there is an act of war, you are at war, right? So they can't say that. On the other hand, watching the gymnastics, the verbal gymnastics that the Indian government has been saying about the Balakot attack, that this was a non-military strike.
Yeah.
So I mean, did they like send some hobbyist pilots out of India?
That is.
No, but there is a reason. See, I don't dismiss that statement.
Okay.
The point is, if they get up and say, "Oh, we committed a military strike into territory controlled by Pakistan under international treaty," there is a problem. Then they are admitting that they have committed an act of war.
Yeah, but
right?
International community say India has.
I didn't say community. I said international treaty. These are
no. I'm talking
issues,
about
right?
some capitals, world capitals, France, Germany, United States.
Those are secondary issues, right?
Yeah.
Those guys are also watching this, right?
Yeah.
Because they also have treaty obligations.
Yeah,
India and Pakistan.
but they did not talk about it.
My point is, in this whole discussion, nobody. When you and I come sit down and talk about the, legal, moral, grammatical meanings of words, we are not addressing the issue that the leadership and the people involved are in. Because, we can talk about principle and what is happening to Kashmiris. Let me say what I feel about Kashmir in that regard. I think Kashmir has been, I'm trying to avoid words that might not be appropriate for broadcast. Kashmir has been misused and abused by all sides during the discussion.
5 parties, of course.
All parties, Pakistan, India, everybody, right? Yeah. Because Pakistan has been using Kashmir, at least since the days of General Zia, as a stick to beat India with, or at least to irritate India with, right? They've not really been working, because the first time I actually met a Kashmiri freedom fighter, this was Muzaffarabad in 1990 or so. I was a young person, and I was coming from that idealistic point of view. I asked, what is your strategy? You guys are committing these little pinprick things. What is the bigger strategy? Is there a strategy to quote unquote liberate Kashmir? And he went off on emotional and other things. The question
nothing is specific.
So
right?
My point is, we can have that discussion that you want to start about what is right for Kashmir, what is right for Kashmiris, but that's a whole other discussion. Right now, what we are discussing, the way I see it, is what India and Pakistan are doing to each other right now. Because if you get, although one ancillary or I think tangential benefit of this whole issue, which is actually what Pakistan and Pakistanis are trying to do right now, is raise that Kashmiri issue onto the front burner. Because one thing that has now come onto the news and is having to be dealt with by the New York Times and everybody is the fact that Kashmir is a mess. Civilians are getting killed. Abuses are happening in Indian occupied Kashmir. I mean, Pakistani Kashmir, at least we're not abusing Kashmiris. However, the state of Pakistani Kashmir is not very good.
That's correct.
But what is happening in to use the Indian calls it the state of Jammu and Kashmir, we call it Azad Kashmir. What is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian state, is a mess. And the way I see it, if there's any good coming out of this whole discussion, of this whole 3 weeks is that issue is now starting to rise in the Western, discussion space and discourse, and inside India. Because what has happened to Kashmiris around the rest of India, just I think a day or two ago in my ancestral home of Lucknow, is making a lot of Indians sit up and say that we have spent 3 generations trying to say, oh, Kashmir is part of India, Kashmiris are Indians, and now we are treating them like foreigners and fifth column. What the faluda is going on here?
Yes. Thanks to Prime Minister Modi for
and that's kind of...
Riyaz, you have a last word.
Yeah, so I think as Sabhat pointed out, this incidents, what we have seen recently, the events of the last few days, have absolutely brought Kashmir back on the international agenda. There was this New York Times editorial that said that incidents like Pulwama and Balakot and others will happen again if the core issue, it talks about the core issue of Kashmir, between India and Pakistan is not resolved.
And they sometimes somehow say that they cannot resolve, and that is the thing which world community has to
right. And they reject the Indian argument that it's a bilateral.
Yes, it's not going to be bilateral. 5 parties there. How is bilateral anymore?
So that's number one. The second important thing that happened, OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference. OIC is the second largest international organization in terms of membership. It has 57 members. And it had a unanimous resolution passed with 57 members that condemned India's occupation, the word military occupation, and India's terrorism in Kashmir. And it even mentioned Burhan Wani, the murder, the killing of Burhan Wani, as a reprehensible act by the Indian government. So I think the question of Kashmir is back on the agenda. Everybody realizes that this is the core issue that has to be resolved. And that is not what Modi was looking for out of it. He just wanted to talk about terrorism. Now, obviously, that is an issue. I think I wouldn't call it terrorism if the Kashmiris are fighting for their own freedom. However, I think the problem happens that, you know, when they make a reference to Jaish Muhammad, and Jaish Muhammad exists in Pakistan, I think that needs to be cleared up. I think Pakistan needs to crack down and get rid. Yeah, but they need to follow through. Yeah. Make sure that this happens.
They did it before also.
This time. And these guys are no friends of Pakistan.
That's correct. That's correct.
You know, they have also collaborated with TTP, which was killing Pakistani.
70,000.
They also attacked Musharraf.
That's true.
You know, there was an assassination attempt against Musharraf in which JEM was involved.
That's true.
So I think these people are a liability for Pakistan. Pakistan needs to get rid of these people.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard the views of Mr. Haq and Mr. Ashraf, Faqir, I must say. And it would be very nice if we can get hold on some Indian journalist or Indian intellectual in this show and have a chat with our panel on these issues. It would be more appropriate. I try to contact some of some people I know there, but unfortunately I could not get hold on them. Maybe there is not a good time at this time, but of course coming days and months we may be able to have some people from India who can tell us their point of view. So ladies and gentlemen, this was our show. We will be continuing this discussion, of course, and the coming days we will have more shows on this issue. So this was all for this week. I am your host, Misbah Azam. Please keep watching Viewpoint from Overseas. Thank you and good day.